All right, welcome in everybody. This is another edition of the College Hoop News Podcast. I'm your host, Tony Patelis, and tonight we have another conference preview episode. We're going to be talking about the Pac-12 tonight. I brought in a very special guest, Rocco Miller from bracketeer.org. You can find Rocco on Twitter at Rocco Miller and the number 8. I'm sure you're familiar with him. He's been on the podcast multiple times. He's very knowledgeable when it comes to the Pac-12, so who better to have on and join me tonight? Rocco, how are you?
I'm doing well, Tony. I appreciate you having me. Good to be back. Can't wait for another season to start.
Yeah, I can't believe we're about just under 30 days away now from the season. So perfect time to get started here. So like I said, we're going to talk about the Pac-12 tonight. We're going to break down, as we usually do, team-by-team previews. We'll do some picks at the end, our overall outlook on the league. So I think it's, looking at the league, I think it's going to be pretty interesting to see if they can improve on last year. As we know, they got 3 NCAA bids, Arizona, Arizona State, and UCLA. Unfortunately, all 3 of those teams lost their opening matchup, so that was pretty disappointing. But I definitely think there's a chance for improvement on paper. I like a lot of these teams. I think, there's maybe even 6, I'd say maybe even 7 that could be in the mix for an NCAA tournament bid. I think the league's kind of had a kind of underachieving feel the last few years. So hopefully this year they can turn it around and change everybody's opinion. So what's your overall thought on the league heading into this year? Do you think it's going to be better or worse, kind of the same, Rocco?
Yeah, well, it's kind of a tough question to answer because the opportunities are there for more teams, I think, than last year. I think there was a lot of teams rebuilding and then also just young and not quite ready for the non-conference portion of the schedule. And like the Pac-12 likes to do in many seasons, and especially in the last decade, a lot of the teams shoot themselves in the foot in the non-league play. Quite opposite last year with a couple teams. Arizona State, of course, if it wasn't for their non-league, wouldn't have had a prayer for the tournament. And their undefeated non-conference play, including wins over 2 number 1 seeds, Kansas and Xavier, and a win over Kansas State and a couple other big wins, carried them even though they lost 11 of their last 19 games and still got them into the play-in game. So that shows how important the non-conference schedule is, especially for the Pac-12, because once the teams are set and we're into January and it's nothing but Pac-12 games from there, those non-conference strength of schedules are already established. And so this year, I think the teams did a little bit better job of taking note of that and getting aggressive. So I do want to call out teams like Utah, who are going to go to Kentucky this year and play a way more big games than they're used to playing in non-conference games. And then the Washington Huskies, they went out and got Auburn late to play them on the road. And with the new quadrant system, that those games are crucial. I know a couple teams tried and didn't quite get there, like Colorado. The best they could do is go to New Mexico. But, even there, if New Mexico ends up in the top 75, that could become a quadrant 1 game. And so anyway, I think a lot of that rides on the non-league for how many bids the league ultimately ends up with. I think as we dig into the forecast, we'll talk about which teams those are. But yeah, so I do think the league did a little bit better job to get themselves in a better position. But I also think there's no guarantees for any of these 12 teams, because there's too many question marks across the league.
Right. And let me just confirm, I'm not saying they're going to get 6 or 7 NCAA bids, but I think on paper, if some things break right, I think some of those teams that I can, at least get in the mix for a bid. So, right. So we're going to get into our team-by-team previews. As usual, we're going to go in alphabetical order. So tonight, we're obviously going to start with Arizona. So, Arizona is coming off a pretty disappointing ending to their season. As we know, the Wildcats pretty much got blown off the court by Buffalo in that first round of the NCAA tournament. It was kind of a cherry on the top. That team really just didn't meet expectations, and you might laugh and say, well, they won 27 games, they won the Pac-12, but that was a team that was number 1 in a lot of people's preseason polls. They were a national title contender level roster, in my opinion. So I think that's why I think they didn't meet expectations. So now that they got off to that awful start as well, which I think kind of hurt them. Their coach was under fire. DeAndre Ayton was accused of taking money, which right now with all the stuff going on with the court, it looks like he did, but we just don't know yet. So looking ahead, Rocco, Arizona to me one of the more tough teams to gauge because a lot of their young guys from last year, they didn't play a ton of minutes. So it's kind of hard to say how good they'll be this year. There wasn't a big sample size for a lot of these sophomores, Brandon Randolph, Ira Lee, guys like that. I think the good thing is they have some experience coming in this year, guys like Ryan Luther, Chase Jeter, Justin Coleman, a point guard. So those guys bring production, but again, they also bring experience. What do you think about Arizona heading into the season?
Yeah, it's a loaded question because the way that this Arizona basketball season unfolds could go a multitude of ways. Very tough to predict. But we have, coming off of just a really weird season last year, like you mentioned, they got swept in the Bahamas tournament at the start of the year, which was just completely out of nowhere, top 10 team preseason, and then bounced back and got some big wins, Alabama, Texas A&M, UConn. Ended up winning the league, winning the conference tournament, survived a couple scares in that tournament, but got the trophy, and then just really got their doors blown off by Buffalo. So then that led us to the the off season. And in the off season, of course, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the couple big decommits, Shaquille O'Neal's son decommitting, and there was another big one in there. I'm not the name slipping, but that all transpired because the clouds around the program. And Sean Miller ultimately, by the end of summer, was able to get Brandon Williams to stay and recommit to Arizona. And I think that was really key for this year because I think they're going to really heavily depend on him to run this team from the point guard's position. And from everything I hear about him is he's just dynamic and a really effective transition player. And the question will be is, can he really defend? But then they also, they have another long, athletic, skilled guy, Emmanuel Acott, that they're going to depend on a lot. He's can play almost all 5 positions on the floor. They'll likely have him at power forward to start off the game, but they can mix and match a lot of combinations with a guy like that. And, you mentioned Chase Jeter, obviously very highly touted guy out of high school, got banged up at Duke with his disc injury, ended up leaving, coming back to the West Coast, and now had his year off. So you'd like to think that he's ready to go, but when you have a disc issue, no guarantees, that could pop back up at any time. You also mentioned Brandon Randolph. I was watching Sean Miller's press conference today. He continually talked about Randolph and his ability to contribute in a big way from a scoring standpoint. So definitely watch out for him. And then you also have, like you mentioned, Justin Coleman, who transferred from Samford, but he also played his first 2 years at Alabama. When he was at Alabama, he had some really big games. I think he had 35 one night against Arkansas and went over 20 quite a few times. So they're not going to have any problems scoring the ball. I think defensively there's some concerns, and I think they're going to have as they always do, a monster home court advantage. They'll still sell out all their games. There's not really any other show in Tucson going on. So they have a great mix of student passion for their program, and then also the elderly folks show out in droves there. So very hard for anybody to win in McHale, even against this year's team. I think Arizona could have some struggles on the road. I think when it's all said and done, I guess if I had to predict, I think they're going to just barely fall a little short, but it could easily go either way. I think, and then a lot of it has to do with how some of these guys come back from injury and how they're able to maintain, the multiple distractions that are going to continue to carry on.
Yeah, that's a really good breakdown there, Rocco. This team I think is different than last year's. There's no really elite level talent. There's not any one and done guys on this roster, in my opinion. Where last year, you guys like Ayton, who's obviously the number 1 pick in the draft. I think that sophomore class is going to be a really big piece of this puzzle. Like you said, can guys like Ira Lee improve? Brandon Randolph, you mentioned Emmanuel Acott. If those guys can take another step up, I think they're going to be in a lot better shape. And I think Justin Coleman is a really important piece because, like a guy you mentioned, Brandon Williams, if he's not ready to step up and lead the team consistently as a freshman, you have Justin Coleman right there to step in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think they definitely have a lot of options. There's some versatile mixes and matches that Sean Miller can put together on the floor, and they kind of have a tricky setup. They'll get 3 cupcakes at home to start off the year with Houston Baptist, Cal Poly, and UTEP. But then they're off to Maui, and this is the first year that the Maui tournament hasn't had Chaminade, so they don't have that built in. Okay, even if we lose our first 2, we're going to be able to beat Chaminade cushion. So they're going to get Iowa State right off the gate, and I think they're probably going to be an underdog in that game. And then if they lose, they'll get the loser of Gonzaga, Illinois, which is another tough one. And then another tough team will come from the other side of the bracket, no matter what they do. So they could be looking at another preseason tournament going 0-3 potentially. And that could really get them behind the 8 ball for at-large bid consideration. But once they get into December, they'll have a few more opportunities when they host Baylor, they go to Alabama, they go to UConn. And again, they just need Alabama, UConn to be top 75 to get a top quadrant win out of those. So they'll really learn a lot about it. We'll all learn a lot about it, this Arizona team in Maui. And then, it'll be interesting to see how they bounce back, based on how that goes.
Yeah, I'm excited and very intrigued to see how Chase Jeter is in this system, because he was a guy that I think he was like a top 30 guy out of high school who committed to Duke.
Oh, yeah.
Really had a big time disappointing career there, just never met expectations. So maybe a new system, a new environment will be good for him, and maybe he can make a big impact for this team.
Yeah, I think so too. And, from what I hear, a lot of that was injury related. And then also, there was some, he a little homesick as well. He's a West Coast guy, and he had a last year to kind of get his bearings in Tucson. So he's now basically the same age as a true junior. And with this roster, he's one of the guys they're going to lean on for at least having some maturity. So.
Yeah, I think those, like I said earlier, I think those transfers were key in the experience department, because, the rest of the team's pretty young. So looking at the rankings, I have them at 5 heading into this season. Rocco, I believe you have them at 7.
I do, yeah. And I don't want to give away the other team's rankings, but it was tough. I mean, I originally, I think yesterday, was thinking they would be 5 as well. But then after digging into some of the other teams and the way I'm just kind of visualizing the conference season playing out, I ended up putting them at 7. But we can dig into that more at the end.
Yeah, for sure. And again, once the podcast is posted on Twitter tonight, guys, I will share both mine and Rocco's rankings, so you guys can get the rundown. But we'll share ours through the previews tonight. So, all right, moving on here, we're going to talk about Arizona State next. The Sun Devils finished 20-12 last year. They went 8-10 in the Pac-12 play. They lost in the first 4 NCAA tournament matchup. So Arizona State might have had one of the weirdest seasons in college basketball history last year. I mean, they came out of the gate. They looked like one of the best teams in the country. They beat Xavier. They win at Kansas. They're ranked in the top 5. And then conference play comes around, and they completely kind of just fell apart. Like I said, they won 8-10 to finish the season. They barely made the NCAA tournament. I didn't think they deserved to make the NCAA tournament. I'm a big believer in how you're playing down the stretch should matter. But I think those non-conference wins kind of kept them in. And then, as I said, they get knocked out in the play-in game. So let's look ahead to this year. Call me crazy. I like the makeup of this roster. I don't know if it's as talented as last year's, but I think they're pretty deep. I think they have a lot of versatility. Like I said, they might not be as talented, but they finally have some size up front. They have Romello White and Daquan Lake back. Tayshaun Cherry comes in. He's a highly rated recruit. Really like the Zylan Cheatham pickup. He's a transfer from San Diego State. They also have a 7-footer coming in Uros Plazvik. Not very familiar with him, but like I said, it gives them some size in that front court. White is kind of an undersized guy there, but a really good rebounder. And then you have a nice backcourt. Remy Martin looks like a breakout candidate. Rob Edwards is a solid transfer from Cleveland State. They're still going to probably be a pretty good offensive club, but they still have to get better defensively. Since Bobby Hurley's been there, that's been a major problem for this team. How do you feel about the Sun Devils heading into this season?
Yeah, this is another tough team to predict, but yeah, and you're
I think you're going to say that every team tonight.
Probably. It's my disclaimer. You got to have that disclaimer, because we're all going to laugh at this in 6 months. So,
right.
Yeah. So yeah, just to touch on what you said about last year first, it was like you said, a very bizarre year, tale of 2 seasons. You had What I think, just in retrospect happened was with that 4-guard lineup that they were throwing at people in the non-league, which was, Remy Martin, and then the 3 guys they lost, Traw Holder and Shannon Evans and Cody Justice. It was really tough for teams to prepare for that were coming off of playing teams in other leagues and then only having maybe a day or two to prep. And it was kind of a perfect storm for ASU. They played Xavier, in fact, the night after Kansas State, and kind of showed them a whole different look that night. So caught them off guard, blew them out by 16, and then the Kansas game, of course. I think when they got into league play, there was enough tape on them, and there was a long enough break over the holidays that, and they started with such a brutal schedule. They had to go at Arizona, at Colorado, at Utah, which are arguably the 3 toughest road games in the league. I would certainly argue that the toughest road trip out of any of the combos here are the mountain trip because of the altitude factor. And, there's a lot of studies that show it gives them maybe more of like a 4-point home court advantage than a 3-point that Vegas would typically give. So those were their first 3 games of league play. They held on to beat Utah to start 1-2. But that really exposed them right away, right out of the gate in conference play. And then, they were struggling pretty much throughout from there. And I agree. I don't think they were playing well enough to get in. And I didn't have them in. I had the last team out, and but it worked out the way it did. And now this year's I wanted to give that background because I think this year's team, from a basketball standpoint, is going to be a lot more balanced, and there's going to be better defense. They bring in Zylan Cheatham from San Diego State, and he is one of San Diego State's best defenders. San Diego State is known as, of course, one of the best defensive teams in the country the last 5 years, and he was one of their top defenders. So I think that's going to really help them on that end. Fills a big hole there. They bring in, Rob Edwards is coming in to fill kind of a key role in the offense, that the void that Holder, Evans, and Justice left. And Tayshaun Cherry has a ton of talent, and they'll need to try to get him back quickly. I hear he has a knee and won't be back for a few more weeks, and there's a chance he could miss the first month. So we'll have to keep our eye on that. And same with Daquan Lake. He's coming back from a knee as well. But again, he's a dominant shot blocker, and that also gives them some defensive presence. And Bobby Hurley now has the option to do a lineup with Cheatham and Lake together that could really be intimidating in the paint. And that was something we didn't really see much of at all last year, or that he didn't have the option to have. And then last year they actually had a guy named Kamani Lawrence that was projected to play a lot, and he tore it up in their preseason exhibitions, and then he got a bad injury. He was out for the year, but they're saying now he's back to full strength and looks amazing in practice. So I'm kind of expecting him to provide some spark, probably off the bench. We all know what Remy Martin can do. And, the more and more I chewed on this team, I really like the makeup and all the options Hurley has. I know Hurley's dad was a big harper on defense, and Coach K was back at the time when Hurley played for Duke, and they played some pretty good defense at Buffalo too. So I think last year was a little bit of an anomaly. Now he's getting back to the way he likes to coach. So those are all the positives. I think the other aspect is, these guys need to learn how to play together, and that might take some time. So it could be almost like the opposite of last year. I think they could struggle maybe a little bit early on, especially with some of these injuries. But I think by conference time, they could actually be in pretty good shape.
Yeah, I had Kamani Lawrence wrote down here too. He's really versatile as well. He can kind of guard multiple spots, so that could possibly help on the defensive end as well. Yeah, that's the thing. I was just surprised the last few years since he's arrived there, the defense just hasn't been good. And I think of Bobby Hurley when you think of him. You think toughness, you think defense. So hopefully they can kind of put it together this year. I have them at 7. But I think they have a pretty high ceiling. So out of the gate, I'm going to, put them kind of low in the 7 spot. Where do you have them, Rocco?
Yeah, so for conference standings purposes, I've got them 5th. I think they're going to be, again, really close to the bubble. They've got a pretty good schedule to lead up to that. Again, I don't think they're going to be as ready for that schedule as they were last year, just because last year they were more free flowing and run and gun, and now they're actually going to try to play some defense and have a little bit more structure on offense. But they'll get their chances against Mississippi State, Nevada, Kansas. Those are all huge games, and then they actually get some 2 SEC road games in a 3-day stretch when they go to Georgia, and Vanderbilt. So just win maybe 2 of those 5 and then get like 11 wins here in the league. I think they're sitting in really good shape for a bid. But I've got them 5th for these purposes.
All right. So Rocco has Arizona State 5th. I have them at 7th. Let's move on here. We're going to talk about Cal next. A pretty rough year last year for Cal, obviously. 8-24 overall. They went 2-16 in conference play. First year with new coach Y. King Jones. So we're going into year 2 here under Y. King, and while I think he's slowly bringing some interesting pieces to this team, I don't think in any way they're ready to compete near the top half of the league. You know, I really like guys like Darius McNeil. I like Justice Suing. They add Paris Austin, but it's the rest of the roster that just doesn't have the depth and the talent level really to compete with the likes of like Oregon, UCLA, USC, teams like that. I think it's going to be a pretty rough year. Maybe they can scratch off a couple more wins. You know, they do have some nice newcomers. Connor Vanover is a freshman. He can kind of bring some post presence, rim protection. They're going to need that now that Kingsley Okoro is graduated. Matt Bradley was an elite scorer in high school. He's a 4-star guy. The good news is they're better than Washington State. But other than that, I'm not seeing a lot of positives with this team. What do you think, Rocco?
Yeah, I'm with you, Tony. This is a big rebuilding project that Y. King Jones took over last year. If you couldn't tell at the beginning of last year, he proved it in the first 2 months when they lost to UC Riverside, Chaminade, Central Arkansas, and Portland State, and a lot of those by double digits. So a lot of learning curve there. Not a lot of talent to work with last year, despite getting Marcus Lee from Kentucky. But now he's gone, and it's a little bit more of a fresh start. You've got guys like Darius McNeil that comes back, who's a nice player. Same with Juwan Harris Dyson. It sounds like those guys have really worked hard over the offseason. Justice Suing is also a good team player and a little bit give you a little bit of defense and good role player on offense. And then, the guy that's actually really going to run this team this year was a transfer from Boise State. He sat out last year, and that's Paris Austin. And Paris Austin, he'll take that job on with a lot of pride. He's an Oakland guy, so he's right down the road from Berkeley, and he's got some talent. And I know he's excited to take the reins over at the point guard position. And they'll need him to do a little bit of everything: score, pass, rebound, steals. So they're also they've got a couple freshmen with some good early reviews. That would be Andre Kelly and Jacoby Gordon. So we'll see what those guys can do. But yeah, they really have, a big rebuilding project still going on. I think they'll get a little bit better. I don't think they'll lose to as many low major schools this year. But I think in the conference, it's going to be a lot of mismatches and when they face some of the upper echelon Pac-12 schools.
Yeah, I just think the coaching staff needs more time to bring in, more, Pac-12 level guys. I mean, they've done a good job so far. I think Darius McNeil and Justice Suing are, rock solid Pac-12 players. They just need a few more of those guys to put in the mix. And I think that, they'll be able to get back into that middle of the pack, at least maybe next year or the year after. We'll see how much of a leash that Y. King Jones has. I have them in the 11 spot. Like I said, I think they are better than Washington State, but other than that, not much to rave about with this club.
Yeah, I have them at 11th too, just because I think they're a little bit more well-rounded than Wazoo. But I mean, they could easily flip-flop. It really just depends on how this thing comes together. And Y. King Jones only in his second year. It's kind of an unfair position he was put in when Kwanzaa left and the cupboard was bare. So I think they'll give him a little bit of rope, at least to next year. Can't really see him gone. But another guy to watch is they have a 4-star freshman. They recruited Matt Bradley, and he could end up playing a lot. He, from what I hear about him, he likes to pull up and shoot, and he plays really physical and aggressive. So, he could be one of those attitude guys that could change a little bit of the culture from what we saw last year. What I noticed last year was, up until they started benching him, was Don Coleman just running up and down and shooting every time. and he would put up 30, but it would be, how many shots did he miss? So hopefully Matt Bradley's a little bit more under control than Coleman was. Otherwise he'll have a quick leash. And then one other thing to call out is Cal didn't do themselves any favors by agreeing to play in the China game this year. They'll be playing their season opener in Shanghai against Yale. But then by the time they get back home right after that game, it takes 2 days to get home. They get one game at home and then a day off, and then they got to go to New York for 2 games and play St. John's and then VCU or Temple. So, wow. I mean, they're not doing themselves any favors. They're going to do about however many thousand miles that is in airlines travel in the first week of the season.
Wow, that's a rough trip for sure. That might be the roughest trip I've ever heard.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that they're going to be in New York a week later is just kind of nuts to me. Right. But it's all about the money.
Yeah. Oh, we got both me and Rocco have Cal in the 11th spot. So up next is Colorado. I think Colorado definitely showed signs of improvement last year and being a possible threat in the Pac-12 this coming season. You know, I think they have a Pac-12 Player of the Year level guy in McKinley Wright. You know, he was really, really good last year. I think some of their young guys can have breakout years and they'll be able to win consistently this season. I think Lucas Seiwert has to be better. Tyler Bay as well in that front court. I know they're high on Evan Batty. But my fear is they need all of those guys to really improve if they want to compete for an NCAA tournament bid this year. I have them at the 8th spot. I think their ceiling is a couple of spots higher, but right now I just don't know if they have the depth and the talent at that bottom of that roster to kind of compete with the upper echelon teams in the conference. What do you think about Colorado?
Again, another tough one to predict. I love McKinley Wright. I think he's a star, and he proved it in that Arizona game in January last year when he just totally took that game over. And he's not afraid to take any game over. And I think that gives Colorado a special element that a lot of teams in this league don't have, where you've got that guy who's willing in a tight situation to just take a game over. And that gives them a real edge there with him. The other thing is Pac-12 tournament wise, I do think it's going to be a pretty even tournament, as you'll tell by our predictions tonight. But Colorado and Arizona and Utah seem to have a really big advantage in that tournament, especially Arizona. But Colorado seems to play very well there. And so you get a guy like McKinley Wright in some tight games in a neutral court or even pro Colorado, unless they're playing the Wildcats. They've got a real shot here on paper to maybe steal an auto bid if they're not in position to go to the tournament. So just keep that in your back pocket for later in the year. But overall, I do think, guys like Namon Wright, Daleon Brown are 2 really solid wing players. They have the ability to do more than they've shown so far. But they can both score the ball. Daleon Brown's a speed guy, so he can get out and run with McKinley Wright on the break. Tyler Bay is a really improved shooter. In fact, his brother's coming to Washington this year. We'll talk about him later. But yeah, there's some good upside guys coming in, like Dalen Kuntz is an all-around shooter that's coming in as a freshman. They brought in Eli Parquet, who's going to be a total defense guy. So they'll be plugging him in to get stops. They got a JUCO transfer who's a combo guard that should complement McKinley Wright. His name is Shane Gatling. Right. And then Dallas Walton's got a lot of experience inside. And he's starting to improve as a shooter. So, during the season, I think one thing that Colorado hasn't been able to shake about their reputation is they're an excellent home team. Right. Winning at the Coors Event Center is not easy for anybody. But they've been an awful road team. Last year, I think they were 1-10 on the road. And that is that's going to be a big problem for getting any kind of bid. So they'll really need to pick up some road wins. And that game at New Mexico early in the year will be a key one to see if they've been able to shake that.
Yeah. Do you think that Tad Boyle's job security could be in jeopardy at all if they have another kind of 500-ish type season, do you think?
It's tough to see it because Tad's pretty beloved still in Colorado and Boulder. They love him, and Colorado basketball does not have a rich history, and they hadn't really done much forever until at least doing this type of consistent 500 or better play since they got Tad, and so I think he's still got some rope. They're not in one of those areas where there's high expectations all the time. So my gut would say he would be okay, but you never know in today's world. There's a lot of knee-jerk reactions in terms of coaches getting fired. So,
all right. And where do you have them in your rankings, Rocco?
I just like you have them at 8. I really wanted to put them higher when I was doing my breakdown, but like you said, they don't have the proven depth. There's a lot of reliance on upside, and that's just it's too much to just say, okay, they're going to be a top 4 in the league team. I do think they can play themselves into the bubble, but they're going to have a lot of pressure on them in the non-league because they didn't schedule well at all. They're, for out of all the teams that have a shot to play their way into the tournament, I think Colorado's got the worst schedule in this league. Wow. And so, that could come back to haunt them. We'll see who they play out in Hawaii, but some of those teams don't look as strong as they probably thought they would get when they signed up for the tournament. So.
Yeah, they just have a lot of ifs, and I think if a lot of these ifs work out, then they can be pretty good this year. But if not, they're going to probably be right around where they were last year, as we said. They finished 17-15, 8-10 in conference. So both of us have Colorado at number 8. All right, so the next team we're going to talk about tonight is Oregon. So from my perspective, the Ducks are the clear-cut favorite. I have them, at 14 in my preseason top 25 poll. The closest team to them I have is Washington at 21. I think the Ducks just, they have that elite recruiting class coming in. Their front court's loaded. They have stability in the backcourt with Peyton Pritchard. There's just a lot to like with this group. Bo, obviously one of the elite recruits in the country. You have a glue guy in Paul White. I think the difference maker for this team, though, in my opinion, is the addition of grad transfer Ehab Amin. I mean, this kid's just fantastic. He's kind of the definition of a do-it-all guy. He's kind of a super glue guy. He can score, he rebounds. He's an excellent defender. He can distribute. He's the type of player, in my opinion, that can kind of put a team over the top and into maybe kind of the Final Four discussion. I think they can be that good. I really do. What are your thoughts with this Oregon team?
I agree. On paper, they look loaded. And I think the key to that is Peyton Pritchard he's just an excellent assist to turnover guy. He shoots over 41% from 3-point range. He is exactly what you would want to build your team around when you're bringing in a couple of blue chips like Bol and Luis King, and Amin's a new guy to the team. He's going to be a key player. You've got a guy like Victor Bailey who's looking to break out this year. When you have a rock solid guard that's proven and has played in this league and been through all the wars already, I really can't foresee them being a big kind of dip from our expectation level. And I think most of the people picking this out there have Oregon either in the top or number 2. And today, the Pac12 media poll came out; they were number 1. So that just goes to show everybody's seeing this as a loaded team. And I think I think one thing that they'll have to get through is King's got a injury that the ACL he tore in January. He's not ready yet. He may not be back until conference play. They're going to have. Kenny Wooten is a guy that can just fill right in there, though, if they were expecting King to start. So from Wooten, they'll be able to get a little bit more solid rebounds, block shots. He actually led the Pac-12 in block shots last year. Like you said, Amin is going to be a monster on the steals. In fact, it'll be really interesting. So when he was at Texas A&M Corpus Christi playing in one of my favorite conferences, the Southland, he led the nation in steals, 3.4 steals per game 2 years ago. And, of course, we have a steals monster already in the Pac-12 and Matisse Thybulle at Washington. So it'd be really interesting to see who wins that steals title this year between these two guys. So that's just a fun little side thing to watch. But, yeah, this Oregon team on paper, they've got depth. They've got a really solid starting 5, even without King. And I think without the distraction of a personality like Troy Brown, who was, of course, a crazily talented guy, but more kind of into individual stuff than team stuff. I don't think Bol or maybe, I don't know enough about King, but I know Bol is all about getting better every day and concentrating on basketball and wants to be with his teammates. And that guy's versatile across the board, can even shoot threes. I don't see those chemistry issues being as big of a problem this year. So, and Altman's proven as a coach to get the most out of his guys when they're playing together.
Yeah, just looking at this front court, Rocco, I think it's going to be almost impossible to score on this team in the paint. I mean, their interior defense is going to be really their interior defense is going to be maybe the best in the country. I mean, Bol can block shots. Kenny Wooten's a very good shot blocker. I'm sorry, 1 second here. Paul White, again, another good defender. So they have a lot of guys in that front court that they can mix and match. So it's going to be interesting. I could see even one of those guys kind of not getting a lot of minutes because, you got to have guys like Bol on the court, a lot. Again, a couple things that you might be worried about, like you said, the Lewis King injury. I think that's a little bit concerning. He's had that knee problem. And this is a pretty young team. I think they only have 3 upperclassmen, so that's always a little bit concerning. I'm a big experienced guy, but on paper, this is a top 15 team in my opinion. And again, I have them at number 1 in the conference, and you do too as well.
Yeah, I do. But I put in a caveat there. I have them sharing the title with another team that we'll talk about later, but that's just for conference title purposes. I think from a bracketology seeding perspective, I would have Oregon seeded higher than the team they're tied with and being the highest seed in the bracket out of the league. And I right now I've got them around a 4 or 5 seed on paper. I haven't done the whole exercise, but that that mainly just comes from this league being pretty even, and even winning this league, I can't really see anybody being better than 14-4, probably not even better than 13-5.
All right. Oregon's going to be really good. I'm very excited about the Ducks. All right, let's move on here. Obviously, we are going to talk about Oregon State next. 16-16 last year. I believe they finished, the Beavers are coming off another subpar year. I'm starting to think Wayne Tinkle's time might be running out in Corvallis. He's now 57-70 in his time at the school. They did have an NCAA tournament bid in his first year, I believe, but ever since then, program's kind of gone downhill here. I think it comes down to this year. Their top players are pretty good. You have Trey Tinkle, Wayne Tinkle's son. I think the Thompson brothers are really, really talented, but it's kind of the rest of the roster, kind of like with with Cal, where they have a couple guys at the top, McNeil, guys like that. But same thing with Oregon State. It's that rest of that roster where I think they're going to really struggle. There's just so many question marks behind those 3 guys.
Yeah, looking at Oregon State and the Tinkle era, it's been interesting. You got them back to the NCAA tournament for the first time, and I believe it was over 25 years since since Gary Payton Sr. was taking the Beavers to the tournament, and then it was Gary Payton Jr. taking them a couple of years ago. And Tinkle was a part of that rebuild, and that led to some really good recruiting efforts. And now a couple of those recruits have left. They last summer went on a Barcelona trip when the terrorist attack happened, and that really kind of shook the program up. And they didn't really seem to recover mentally from that until later in the year. In the Pac-12, though, they actually played. I mean, if you look at their results from last year, there was only one team to beat them by double digits. And so, being a University of Washington guy, I follow them probably the closest, but the Beavers knocked the Huskies out of the tournament last year in overtime, and they also beat them in a double overtime game in February, which really knocked the Huskies out of the they were pretty much responsible for knocking the Huskies out of the bubble picture. So this team's capable. They play tough. They play everybody tough. They've got experience. They've got both the Thompsons, Stephen Jr. and Ethan are both very experienced. Steven's not afraid to take the big shot. Tress Tinkle doesn't miss when you leave him open. He's also a great all-around player. They bring back an Alfred Hollins that has some serious hops. He's shown some flashes of brilliance, but then there's other games where these guys are just, not with it or not on the same page. So with those 4 guys being kind of the nucleus, and then bringing back Zach Reichel, he gave them a lot of good minutes last year too. They're actually looking really good on paper, and I think they have 6'11", Mr. Rakechevich. He brought in about 15 minutes a game. That he's going to have to play more this year. And then they brought in this year a couple 7-foot guys, very raw guys. But Kaylor Kelly's coming in from JUCO. He had a game when he was playing in a smaller level where he had 10 block shots in a game. So clearly a defensive-minded pickup there. Jack Wilson's an not very well-known guy out of high school, 7 foot as well. So you bring in Rocco, Jack Wilson, Kaylor Kelly. You got 3 7-footers to go with all these guys that have ball skills. And then you also bring in a freshman that can handle backup point guard duties like Jordan Campbell. You got another guy that's a speedster that's going to play a little bit on the wing, Antoine Werner. They actually have some amazing upside compared to what the rest of the league has on paper, I should say. So I think, I have them 9th. I think most people have them 9th or 10th. But I could honestly, if everything clicks for these guys, I could honestly see them getting all the way up into the top 5.
Wow. You just really talked up Oregon State there. I can't believe it.
Well, it's going to go one way or the other, I think. But I think they're gonna battle, and I think that's why Tinkle's job hasn't really been in jeopardy, is because they do fight so hard. I mean, again, I would just recommend get a refresher on all those close losses last year. I mean, those were tough for Beaver fans.
Yeah, I think something that's kind of hurt this program the last few years is Trey Tinkle hasn't been able to stay healthy. I think he had a pretty somewhat healthy season last year, but he needs to stay on the court. And when he's on the court, he's one of the best players in this conference and maybe in the country. I mean, this kid can really score. He's a very good rebounder, can shoot the 3. They're a really big team. They have 7 guys, 6'8" or bigger. I mean, you mentioned a bunch of those guys. I know they really like Jack Wilson. He's a 4-star guy. That could be a 4 sooner rather than later. So, yeah, I mean, there's some interesting pieces on this team. I still think they're going to finish near the bottom. I have them in the 10 spot. You?
Yeah, I'm at the 9 spot, so not far off. But again, I could see them landing at 10. I could also see them getting into the top 5 just because they have such a really good core that have played together and they've got that experience together, and that gives them an opportunity to really have a strong non-conference. Their non-conference schedule isn't the best. I mean, their big games are at St. Louis. Texas A&M's actually going to play them in Portland. And then, besides that, it's a bunch of bye games with maybe the best one being Missouri State coming with a new coach. So they're going to rack up a lot of wins early, and maybe from an optics perspective, that's going to make Tinkle look better. But that should also get them really confident heading into league play, and they'll have to be ready because their first league game's at Oregon.
Yeah, their top 3 guys are really, really good, the Thompsons and Tinkle. So, I think those guys alone will be able to keep them in games and keep them competitive possibly in conference play. The way you talk them up, I figured they'd be winning the league.
I'm not gonna go that far, but hey, it'd be a fun story. We could definitely give Tinkle Coach of the Year if that happens.
Okay, well, we're going to see how Oregon State does, and we're going to go back to this podcast in March, and we're going to see where they finish, and then you might get all the credit here. So,
all right, I'll take it, but let's just keep in mind I do have them 9th.
Yeah, I have them 10th, so we're both on the same page when it's all said and done. All right, let's move on here. We have Stanford next. The Cardinal finished 19-16 last year. They finished 11-7 in the Pac-12. So Stanford was a team that, this offseason, right after the season ended last year, I was pretty high on. And then, I thought they could be an NCAA tournament level team with the roster they had coming back. But then, they lose Reed Travis to transfer. He's off to Kentucky. I just think this was a huge blow to this roster. I knocked them down a couple spots after he transferred, excuse me. I think, I had them more in the 5 or 6 range when he was on the roster. I bumped them down to the 9 spot now. I still think there's still some really interesting pieces on this team. I think, Dejon Davis is a star. I think he can be a star in this league. He's a kind of do-it-all type of guy. He can rebound, he can distribute, he can score. I think a key for this team, too, is Marcus Sheffield's back this year. He redshirted last year due to an injury. I think he's a double-digit scorer, in my opinion. The kid I really like is Oscar Da Silva. I think he could be a breakout guy for this team. He can really shoot it. He shot 55% from 3 last year, which was really, really impressive. KZ Okpala had a solid freshman year. So there are pieces on this team, but still, I think the Travis loss was huge. What are you thinking about the Cardinal this year?
Yeah, I'm thinking on the same lines as you. I think it was a huge loss because that allowed things to open up for Dejon Davis and Okpala and some of the other guys on the outside to really have the freedom of movement and without that low post presence, I mean, they'll need to get something out of 7-footer Josh Sharmer to kind of fill some of that void. He actually finished pretty strong in the Pac-12 tourney last year. Didn't do a lot before that. So, but there's really a big hole. I mean, I wrote down, 4 different guys that could try to fill the role, but they're all unknowns for the most part. When you look at Keenan Fitzmaurice and Lucas Kisunas and Jaden Dallaire and Cody Pugh, I mean, those are all really relative unknown guys, a little bit of upside, but not a Reed Travis who's an all-conference player, a guy that really can score at will in the Pac-12, and so it's going to be a big problem. And I think it was evidenced even more today. I watched Jared Haas's interview and press conference, and he even admitted that there are a bunch of individuals still trying to figure out how to play as a team. There's a lot of small, athletic, quick talent. A little bit of length on the wing, but they're really struggling down low, and he's clearly got a big task in front of them to try to get this team to come together. Dejon Davis, of course, like you said, he's a big time talent. He's from my hometown of Seattle, and followed him for a long time already since high school days, and he could be kind of just maybe gearing if this season goes sideways a little early on. He could just start gearing up to put together an NBA highlight reel. I could really see that happening. But I think overall they're gonna probably struggle early, and we'll see what they can do when they get to league play.
Jared Haas has done a good job recruiting since he's arrived at the school. I think they have another solid class coming in this year. So they're going to get contributions from their newcomers. They're going to have to play better defense. I think they finished 9th in the conference last year. They need better point guard play, and you might say, oh, they have Dejon Davis. As good as Davis is, he was a turnover machine last year. He's got to do better.
Exactly.
He's got to do better taking care of the basketball. And, they've kind of had some bad luck the last couple of years, too. They've had some transfers, as we know. They've had some injuries. So hopefully this year they can put it together. I have them in the 9 spot. I think that's a safe spot to start the season. I can see them finishing a few spots higher if things break right. I think they're going to be a good shooting team. They have size, but can those guys contribute? You mentioned it. Can a Josh Sharma kind of step up this year and play a bigger role? I think De Silva could possibly be an X factor. His ability to kind of stretch the floor can really open things up offensively. And again, like I said, defense, they got to get better defensively. They gave up almost 75 a game last year. But where do you have them in the rankings?
Yeah, I've got them 10th, just because there's just a little bit too much unknowns compared to Oregon State for my liking. But like with that kind of talent with Davis, De Silva, Akpala, and a few of the other guys here, I think this freshman Cormac Ryan is going to be pretty interesting to watch. He's really athletic. He's a guy that has a really good chance to start from day one, and pretty versatile all around. And then they've got another guy that's a little bit more of a project, but he's got a high upside, a pretty high level recruit, Bryce Wells, another 6'6" wing. So if those guys get up to speed a little faster, then I think this could actually play out a little bit better than what I described earlier.
Yeah, Jared Haas is a very underrated recruiter. He's brought in a little bit of talent there the last few years. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and I think exactly. And, I think that's why Stanford brought him in. I mean, he's got all those North Carolina and Kansas ties, and he's got relationships all over the country. And so it gives Stanford's more of a national recruiting type of school due to the academics. And so he's got access to players in all 50 states. You'll notice, the guys we mentioned today are all from the East Coast. Cormac Ryan's a Massachusetts high school guy. Jaden Dallaire's a Connecticut. And then Bryce Wills is a New York guy. And then you got Lucas Kisunas, who's from Brewster Academy out of New Hampshire, and then another New Hampshire with Keenan Fitzmaurice. So all the guys they brought in are out in your neck of the woods. So Haas is getting players from anywhere that they can qualify, because obviously those high academic standards are the reason why KZ Akpala missed the first 12 games last year.
Right. Absolutely. All right, so let's move on here. We're going to talk about UCLA next. UCLA coming off a 21-12 season, 11-7 in Pac-12 play. They got knocked out in the NCAA play-in game to St. Bonaventure. How embarrassing was that? Jeez. So I think the first thing we have to kind of start off with UCLA, they got some pretty bad news this past few weeks. Sharif O'Neal going to miss the whole season. I believe he has a heart condition, they said. And also the other day, Tiger Campbell, a 4-star point guard, tore his ACL. So that's kind of going to hurt their depth, especially at the point guard spot. I think Campbell would probably play behind Jalen Hands, who I think is going to be great this year. But it's going to be a little bit difficult depth-wise. I think people are overacting a little bit. I think they have more than enough talent to still stay near the top of this conference. So, I think like I said, though, the Campbell injury, I think, hurts more because I think they have some pretty good depth in their front court. They are young in the front court, but they do have depth. So you still have Jalen Hill, Cody Riley, Moses Brown. So like I said, I think they're going to be fine up front if those guys can develop and play well. Alex Olachinsky as well. He's hurt, but I think he's going to be back at some point. I think he's out a few months.
Yeah.
So I think leading the way for this team, obviously, is going to be Jalen Hands and Chris Wilkes, who I think in Wilkes is a Pac-12 Player of the Year guy. I think even he could win the award this year. I think these kind of losses are difficult, but I think they'll be okay. And I think people are, like I said, overreacting a little bit. But, I keep them in that 3. I have them in the 3 spot going into this season. They got a really talented group. I love Moses Brown. I think he could be a possible big-time addition for this team right out of the gate. Steve Alford, we'll see what he can cook up with this group. What do you think about the Bruins?
Yeah, I'm really close to the same page as you. I don't have any arguments with what you said. I think, the Bruins are coming off of, again, they got to the tournament, they got to the playing game. I think they're a little disappointed to have to even play in that game. And then, of course, the Bonnie fans packed the arena, and it was a tough night for them. But they recruit extremely well, as noted. And, you talked about Moses Brown, and I think Moses Brown is really getting an elevated role now due to the unfortunate news to Sharif O'Neal. And I think Moses Brown's got to be excited about it. Everything I remember about him from the McDonald's All-American game last year was he was pissed off because they only gave him 10 minutes, and he dominated the 10 minutes he played, and then he was on the bench the rest of the night. So he really wants to show off his skills. Clearly a guy that's interested in getting to the next level. And this is a great opportunity for him to play around so many talented guys like Chris Wilkes and Jalen Hands and Prince Ali. And, Cody Riley, in fact, will probably be their starting power forward. He was probably their biggest loss last year during that whole shoplifting scandal and had to sit out the whole year because of that. So he's still considered a freshman, a redshirt freshman now. And obviously he's going to be hungry. So I see those 5 guys might be, Washington's probably close, but I think top to bottom might be the best starting 5. Now, from there, I think you got to find a couple pieces on the bench. I think Jules Bernard is a guy that will give them a lot of quality minutes. He's probably their best defender, and he's a slasher that knows how to get open away from the ball, and 6'6", good size, play multiple positions kind of guy, and they've got a ton of talent to make up for those injuries. Hopefully Olasinski can get back at some point. So I don't think it ruins their forecast too much. I still got them getting 3rd in the league this year. And I do think their schedule's tremendous. I think they have the best schedule in this league. They get to play in that 4-team tournament where they get Michigan State in the first game, and then they get the loser or winner of North Carolina, Texas. And then they also they go to Cincinnati. They're going to play Ohio State and Chicago. They're going to play Notre Dame and Belmont at home. So they've done a really, really nice job scheduling and spacing it out. They gave themselves 4 pretty nice warm-up games before they go to play Michigan State. So I really like the way that the whole staff thought about this season and built the roster. It's a great approach. And because of it, they were able to absorb a couple of these big injuries. And I think they're in good position to get to the tournament.
Right. I just saw a lot of people on Twitter, social media, kind of, knocking this team down a few notches because of the losses. But I think they'll be okay. And I think we're going to see Jalen Hands and what he's capable of this year. I don't think we necessarily saw that last year because Aaron Holiday was in front of him. But now this is kind of his team now. I think he's going to see big time minutes, and he's going to show that the reason why he was a 5-star prospect.
Yeah, they really need him, and he needs to keep his head in the game. He likes to talk a lot of trash. He might be the biggest trash talker in the conference. So he's got to be able to keep his head focused on what's going on. But, some guys like that, there's legendary players that have played the game that if they're not talking trash, they don't play very well. So maybe that's what he needs. And we'll see. He's uber talented, like you mentioned, and they've all he has to do is trust his teammates and then know when it's his turn to shine. And I think they'll be in really good shape.
Yeah, me too. I have them I think we both have them in the 3 spot. So we'll see how it pans out. Okay, up next, we're going to talk about Trojan Fury. Obviously, if anybody follows me on Twitter, you know I love USC. And they finished 24-12 last year, 12-6 in conference. They got to the NIT. I think last year was pretty disappointing. Obviously, they had a ton of hype coming into the season. I think a lot of people thought they were a top 10 level team. Really didn't meet expectations. They just missed making the NCAA tournament. They did finish second in the conference, but they just didn't really have the resume to garner an at-large. I thought they were an NCAA tournament team. A few other bracketologists I know thought that as well, but they didn't get in. You know, they did go through a couple issues last year. Obviously, Benny Boatwright missed a lot of time with a knee injury. Anthony Melton was a huge loss. He didn't play because of the FBI investigation. So I'm sure that stuff was kind of weighing on this team. So they did have some distractions. Looking ahead to this year, you know, they have another really talented roster. I mean, I think Andy Enfield has done a fantastic job bringing in talent to this program. You know, I think Jordan McLaughlin is obviously going to be a really big loss, but they definitely have options at the point guard spot. They obviously have Derek Thornton, the Duke transfer. I think he's going to get an opportunity to be the starter, especially now that Elijah Weaver, who was a big-time recruit for them, he's out for quite a while with an injury now. Benny Boatwright is back. I think Jordan Usher is a possible breakout guy for this team. You got to love the recruiting class. As I said, Kevin Porter Jr., Elijah Weaver when he gets back healthy. So there's a lot to like with this team. What are you feeling about the Trojans this year?
Yeah, good recap. And, you know, just because my main area of focus is bracketology, I will point out that out of 187 bracketologists that submitted final brackets last year, 173 of those had USC in. So only 14 didn't. Wow. So I don't know if the committee was right or what, but anyway, I was one of those 173, and it was a pretty bad snub for a Power 5. I think they had a 32 RPI and a 36 strength of schedule, which would have, if memory serves me correct, I don't have it in my notes. That's the highest Power 5 or Power 6 team to ever get snubbed. So frustrating for USC to say the least. There's a lot of controversy about the FBI thing and maybe conspiracy theories around that. But regardless, we got to move forward to this year. And this is a year I thought, you know, when I was thinking about it, just kind of my own, you know, recollection and looking at recruiting and all that. This is a team I really like on paper. You know, one thing that you got to account for is Benny Boatwright's really been plagued by injuries the last 2 years, and he's missing practice again this year. That's a very big concern. Yeah. Of course, he's the engine. He's the spark that makes the engine go. So they really got to get him healthy, and if he can't get right this year, it could be a little bit of a struggle. Shaquan Aaron, he's had a lot of potential. Louisville transfer and played with USC last year. He really needs to realize that potential this year. It's his senior year. He's been highly hyped for a long time, and now it's now or never for him. Derek Thornton, as you mentioned, he is a Duke transfer, but he's also going to carry a lot of the weight this year with a lot more minutes and counted on for a little bit more production. You know, I would be remiss if I don't talk about Kevin Porter Jr., because I think Kevin Porter Jr. is probably the best freshman in the country that most people aren't talking about. And he may, in fact, go down as one of the best freshmen, if not the best freshman in the country by the end of the year. The guy is unbelievable off the dribble. He in the McDonald's game scrimmages last year, he was coming in as probably, I think, the lowest rated recruit in the McDonald's game, and he crushed it in all those scrimmages. Nobody could stop him. He's improved dramatically in the last 24 months. Another Seattle guy that I'm very familiar with. So I'm expecting huge things out of Porter Jr., even though he's probably a one and done. At least he's going to put on a show. I don't know if it's going to lead to a lot of wins, but he's going to be putting on a show, and he's going to have his chance to shine with some of these other guys banged up, like Elijah Weaver, like you mentioned. So definitely worth the price of admission by himself. And then you got Jerron Brooks, who is another highly heralded recruit who was committed to USC, then decommitted and committed to St. John's, then opened it back up, almost went to Washington, and ended up with USC anyway. But anyway, he's here now, and big, 6'9", 220. He can really help off the bench. I don't think he'll start. I think he'll be playing beneath Nick Rakachevich, who's a nice 6'11" returning junior, averaged 8 and 6 last year. Overall, I really like the prospects for this team. I haven't even mentioned Jonah Matthews, who's a guy that Andy Enfield talked about a lot today as the most improved player. Yeah, Enfield said today that he's the most improved player on the roster by a lot. And so they're actually going to be counting on Matthews and Shaquan Aaron, of course, and Thornton to really lead the team. So if those guys can keep these young freshmen in tune with what the team's trying to accomplish and still let them showcase their talents, I think this could be a really good year for USC.
Yeah, you mentioned Nick Rakosevich, and he's a kid I really like. I thought when Benny Boatwright was out last year, he was one of their better players. He had a really good stretch filling in for Benny. So hopefully he can maybe take a step up this year. I think they have a really good shot to be a lethal shooting team. I mean, they got guys all over the floor. Aaron's a capable shooter. Jonah Matthews can really shoot it. Some of their newcomers as well. Charles O'Bannon is a sophomore that I'm a little intrigued with. He really didn't get many minutes last year, so maybe he can have a bigger role with this team. I know he was highly regarded coming out of high school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he needs to. He will be taking on a bigger role from all intents and purposes, and they're expecting him to see increased minutes. So if he can realize his talents and mesh well with the team, that could be a big factor. And then all of a sudden, if those things are realized, you got a team with a really good amount of depth and a ton of talent. In fact, if you're just looking at the roster and the kind of playmakers they have, they would probably win a tournament if it was just open gym. Yeah. With no refs.
I'm still a little concerned about the point guard spot. I'm not a total believer in Derek Thornton. Jordan McLaughlin was such a big part of this team for the last few years, just an excellent distributor, never turned the basketball over. So I'm a little concerned. When Elijah Weaver gets back, maybe, if Thornton's struggling, he can step in and take on that role. But that's my main concern with this team. But they got talent all over the floor. They have size. They're going to have, like I said, a pretty good shooting club. So I have them in the 4 spot. And you do too, Rocco?
No, I actually have. I think I said my picks backwards. I actually had UCLA 4. I misspoke, and I have USC 3. Oh. But again, I could see that being a shared thing for third place, and then somebody wins the tiebreaker. So really not a big difference.
All righty. All right. So up next, we're going to talk about Utah. They finished 23-12 last year. They did make it to the NIT championship game where they lost to Penn State. Another successful year. Now, I kind of always put Utah a spot or two ahead of where I think they'll finish because I'm that big a fan of Larry Kostoviak. His teams always seem to be in the mix. They're always in the thick of it. This year's team definitely has a couple of question marks, outside of Cedric Bearfield, who I believe is their only returning starter. They're going to need some young guys and newcomers to step up. Looking at the roster, I really like Donnie Tillman. He did get a few starts last year, but he dealt with some injuries as well. I think he's going to be that second scoring option for this team behind Bearfield. And I think this year, Jace Johnson's finally going to break through. He hasn't played big minutes in his first few years with the program, but when he's been on the court, he's been productive. So I think maybe those 3 guys can maybe man the offensive end. I think Charles Jones Jr. is a guy they like. He's a JUCO kid coming in. I love Novak Topolovic. He's an Idaho State transfer, averaged 10 and 7 last year. I know they like Timmy Allen, who was the number 1 player coming out of Arizona. I think defensively they'll be fine. If they can find some scoring options on the offensive end, I think they're going to be right in the mix of it again, right in the middle of the pack, maybe win a few extra games, more games than we think. I think the front court has a shot to be really, really good. There's still some question marks, but I think they're capable. What do you think about Utah, Rocco?
I agree with your initial statement there where, Larry Kostoviak teams typically are underrated preseason and overlooked because they go the JUCO route so often. And they put a couple of those guys in the NBA, and they get a lot of players that are unknowns. And now they've got a guy Charles Jones Jr. That's the reigning junior college player of the year, and he'll be counted on with Bearfield to provide prolific scoring, and I wouldn't doubt it if that happens, because I know Krystowiak knows how to recruit these JUCOs. Another one is a 7-footer coming from JUCO, Brandon Mobley, that's going to be giving him some real size down low, along with the 7-foot transfer Novak Topolovic that you mentioned. And Topolovic, he actually played a ton of minutes at Idaho State over 3 years. I think last year he played 70% of the team's minutes, which for a center is almost unheard of. They clearly didn't have the kind of depth at Idaho State that Utah has. And then you already talked about Jace Johnson being a much improved player probably this year. So I really like what they got down low. It kind of reminds you of all those big Utah teams that they seem to have every year, and they just find these guys however they need to. And I think, they're getting a little bit undervalued in some of the polls, but, there's a reason why 4 straight years they finished in the top 4 in league play. And I definitely would not be surprised to find a way to do that again. And that's a big deal, because you finish top 4, you get a bye in the first round of the tournament. And so everybody in the league, high level, if you can't win and you want to be in that top 4, and Utah just finds a way to do it year in and year out. And then last year, they fell a little bit short in the tournament, but they got all the way to the NIT title game. And again, that's a testament to Coach K, not Coach K, that Coach K, but Larry K, keeping his players focused and honed in, and really keeping that team together. He's proven that he's a great coach in terms of keeping the team together and getting the most out of his players, and getting them to play together. And what Utah did a little bit differently this year versus previous is, I mentioned at the beginning, they actually put together a really nice schedule. They're going to go to Rupp Arena, and even if they take their lumps there, that's a great experience, and it really actually improves their strength of schedule. They've got Nevada coming in for a huge game on December 29th, a couple days before New Year's Eve, and that will be a really good tune-up for league play. And they got to open up their league play at the Arizona school. So they're going to have a crazy 6-day stretch there playing those 3 teams. But also they're going to do the Wooden Legacy tournament, where there's a couple pretty high-quality programs that they would likely meet up with at some point. They're going to go to Minnesota and play them on the road as a possible tournament team. So it's just Utah in years past has sometimes sandbagged that schedule. I think 2 years ago they were actually ranked in the 300s. So it's really good to see that they're learning on that part as well. So I do think they got a really decent chance to get in the tournament. However, I don't think they'll get enough wins, and they'll fall just short and end up back in the NIT.
Yeah, they have a great home court advantage too.
Exactly.
In their building, and they're one of the teams where once I sat down and kind of broke the roster down, I did like it better. Once I broke it all down, and like I said, if Tillman and Bearfield's going to be a consistent scorer. But if Tillman and Jones can come in and both, score the basketball at a pretty high rate, then you have those 2 guys in the front court. I think they can, make a little bit of noise again. And I have them in the 6th spot heading into the season.
Exactly where I have them. And that was a little bit of a hedge. So I have, just to go back to where I had Arizona, which I put 7th, I really just think this Utah team is going to stay together throughout the year, and the volatility of this potential Arizona season just pushed Utah a little bit above Arizona in my books. I can trust Utah at home. I can trust Arizona at home, but I think Utah did a little bit better job scheduling, and I think they're also in better position to have a little bit more success in the non-conference. And so maybe they end up in a tie or somewhere close to that. But I'm going with Utah a little bit above Arizona right now.
All righty. All right. So just for the record, we're going to talk about Washington next. Rocco is a giant Washington homer, just for the record. Come
on.
I'm just kidding. But it is the team he roots for. So I just had to mention that. So Washington coming off, I think, a very successful year in Mike Hopkins' first year with the team. 21 wins, and they got to the NIT. They were in the NCAA tournament mix for quite a while last year, which was a nice thing. I think Mike Hopkins took a team that really wasn't expected to be all that good, and I think they overachieved. So that's a good sign. The good news is everyone is back. I mean, you add and then you add a really good recruiting class. So this team has pretty high expectations this year. I have them at 21 in my top 25. I think a key for this group is, they'll be more comfortable with a year under their belt with the zone, that they play, that 2-3 that Hawkins brought over from Syracuse. They weren't great defensively last year, but again, they're, a new system. It's going to take time for them to get used to it. They just seem to be one of those teams, Rocco, that have all the pieces. They have a really good big in Noah Dickerson. They have an elite scorer in Jalen Knoll. They have a versatile defender guy in Matisse Thybulle. David Crisp is a solid point guard. So I really, really like this team. If they can get better on the defensive end, I think they're going to be an NCAA tournament team without a doubt.
Agreed. Well, and I think the defensive end is a really interesting place to start because, of course, Hopkins came from Syracuse and instituted the 2-3 zone. And it took, most of the people that I talk to that follow the program closely expected it to take some time. And I've been following Syracuse basketball my whole life. And I know that their zone gets tougher and tougher as the season goes on. And most of us know that in March, it's really throws non-conference teams off and gives Syracuse a big edge in the tournament. And our hope, from a Washington standpoint is the Huskies can replicate that and mix in some really good athletes to even make it better. And there was really amazing glimpses of that last year when they beat Kansas and Kansas City right in the early part of December. That was kind of like a shock the world type of win. And then that kept the Huskies in the NCAA tournament talk for most of the year because they were able to carry that victory and a couple other solid wins along the way to stay relevant in the conversation. And, they played well in conference, went 10-8, probably needed to win 11 or 12 to get there. But these guys really picked up on the zone. A couple of guys that really got it quickly. It was Matisse Thybulle, of course. He's the Pac-12 leader in steals, probably one of the nation's leaders. And he's just he's so versatile. It's incredible to watch him play defense. He doesn't miss open shots on the offensive end. He's a really steady, silky smooth player. Now it's his senior year, and it's starting to remind me of some of the guys of Huskies past, like Quincy Pondexter and Justin Holiday, who had really solid careers going into their senior year, and then their senior year they just exploded and took over. And it was really, really nice to see Thybulle do that. And he doesn't even really need to take over the way those guys provided their sparks because you got guys like Jalen Noel, who Noel is probably the most talented offensive player. And I think last year he showed that, especially in the first 3 months. And as the season went on in February, March, I think the grind got to him and he seemed to hit a little bit of a wall and he just wasn't as effective. Didn't look for his shot as much, didn't have the same energy. And a lot has been talked about that over the offseason. He's worked a lot harder on his strength. He knows what to expect. And the majority of folks are expecting him to be ready to get through an entire season and play at a high effective level like everybody knows he can. And then you got, like you said, David Crisp. That's an interesting guy to bring up. He's been a fan favorite and also a fan most hated guy because there's some games where he'll just chuck shots up out of nowhere that are definitely not part of the offense, and it just drives you bonkers. And then there's other games where he can't miss, and you're like, wow, we wouldn't win that game unless Crisp got hot. So it's just kind of like you can't live with him, you can't live without him kind of player. And with Hopkins and all these great players or guys that are becoming great players around him, it's a chance for Chris to take a step back and say, hey, listen, I don't got to try to take the team on my back anymore. So really hoping he can do that. And then Noah Dickerson's just a guy that's always had talent, and he's finally got his body in good shape. His freshman and sophomore year, he was putting on some pounds and getting winded quickly. Didn't really stand a chance on those mountain trips to Colorado and Utah. And now he's really seen a dietitian and dropped that weight, and he's looking like he's in the best shape of his life. He put up great numbers last year. He's got the zone pretty much down defensively from what we saw at the end of last year. So you got to be excited about him. And then a couple big guys coming in. Sam Timmons will continue to be a starter because Hopkins likes to have him in there and kind of mix things up. He's a tough, rugged New Zealand guy, but he won't play most of the game. He'll start and give some sparks. But then I expect actually BPJ is what we call him, Brian Penn Johnson. He's a very talented 4-star kid, 7-footer. He's got a ton of skill. If he can pick things up quickly, he'll play the majority of the minutes at center. And then behind him is, or maybe next to him is Nate Roberts. We'll see how that rotation works out. But Roberts also another very talented 6'11" guy. And we haven't even dug into Nas Carter and Hamir Wright coming off the bench. And Nas Carter's got a ton of athletics ability. He's probably the best dunker on the team. He plays really solid defense. Hamir Wright was a all New York City high school player that, because of Hopkins Syracuse ties, got him to come out west, and he's just scratching the surface too. And so these guys, they don't have to. There's all this talent coming off the bench, and they don't have to be the all-stars. They can just do their thing, play their roles, and understand the zone. It's a really good mix. And
right. And
go ahead, Tony.
I think a big key last year, and I think where they're in a lot better shape this year, is I think they're going to get a lot more production from their bench players. Where last year, especially offensively, it was really Noel, Dickerson, Crisp, and Thibault, and it really dropped off after that. I think this year they're going to get a lot more production from the rotation guys.
Yeah, agreed. And then you mix in Jamal Bay, who's probably the best recruit that the Huskies picked up, and he's a guy that can really shoot the rock, just like his brother at Colorado. And he was Nevada High School Player of the Year. He comes with a really high basketball IQ, and you just can't redshirt guys like that. So I'd be shocked if he's redshirted, but I'm pretty sure he'll be a pretty big part of the bench pieces for the Huskies, and capable of starting if they didn't have the veterans in front of them.
Yeah, for sure. And I have them at number 2. I think they're the biggest threat to Oregon by far.
I do as well. And I'm calling a co-championship just to make it a little bit more exciting. But overall, I've got them number 2 because I think they would be seated just a little bit behind Oregon on paper for the tournament.
Yeah, that's where your bias comes in.
Well, it's one of those things, Tony. If I pick Washington 1, Oregon 2, I get crap from all the Oregon fans, and if I pick the other way around, I get crap from all the Husky fans. So why not just make them co-champs?
Exactly. Good idea. Good idea. All right, so we're going to finish up tonight with Washington State. Ernie Kent somehow still employed. I thought he might lose his job this past season, but he is still around, and I think it's going to be probably another rough year for the Cougars. Looking at the roster, I really like, obviously, Robert Franks. He's a really talented kid, a great scorer. Obviously, can get on the glass as well. He could have possibly gone to the NBA last year, but decided to come back. He was actually the most improved player in the Pac-12. Deontay Daniels is their second leading scorer. He's returning, averaged 9 a game last year. I think a kid to watch is Isaiah Wade. He was a double-double machine at Iowa Western. He's a JUCO kid. This is a team that won 12 games last year. They won 4 conference games. I can't see them improving all that much. It's not like they brought any impact guys in outside of Isaiah Wade I see on the roster here. What are you thinking about the Cougars this season?
Yeah, I think it's going to be another really challenging year. They've got you just went through, some of the key players, but they basically have Franks, who's got the freedom to do what he wants, and a really capable shooter. Daniels also can do. It's interesting. You look at Deontay Daniels and Robert Franks are the only 2 guys that got through all 4 years of Ernie Kent. So that kind of says either Kent's recruiting a lot of JC guys. They're getting a lot of hard. They're having a lot of trouble getting guys to come out of high school. One guy that they were able to get was CJ Ellaby, who's actually a pretty well-recruited guy coming out of Seattle. He's also another shooter, but he can create his own shot. So they're figuring out ways to get offense. And I think they're going to want to do some run and gun and score a lot of points. And they made a pretty strategic hire last year when they hired the head coach of Garfield, Coach Hairston. Garfield's a prominent high school where Brandon Roy and several other NBA players have played in Seattle. And by hiring him as an assistant, they're getting more access to players. So that's part of their long-term vision if Kent sticks around. But it's really they're really way behind the 8 ball. It was last year was crazy because they actually won the Wooden Legacy when they beat.
I remember.
Yeah. So they beat St. Mary's and I think it was San Diego State, and just caught everybody off guard. And then I think after that, Ernie was talking about that today and said everybody, thought they were a top 25 team. And I think they might have actually got ranked after that week, if I remember right. But he said everybody kind of thought they were better than they were and couldn't get them back on track. So it was a really interesting year from that standpoint. But yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of the same struggles. Franks is a good player, got a chance to play at the next level. He tried to enter the draft, didn't sign an agent and pulled out. So it clearly didn't have the grades yet, but he'll continue to improve. And they got a couple of JUCO transfers coming in, Isaiah Wade and James Streeter. Streeter's a 6'10" guy, gives them some size, and a really athletic JUCO kid is coming in, a 6'5" guy, Marvin Cannon, that might be able to do some things. And they're excited about another freshman, a 6'8" kid, Aljaz Kuhn, who's out of New York. He's out of Florida. He's a skilled and a scoring threat. A lot of people don't really know a lot about him out here in the West, so including myself. So we're kind of a wait and see with some of these bench guys. But on paper, I really can't see them doing much better than 11th. And in fact, I think Cal's just got a little bit more balance than Wazoo.
Yeah, just to go back to last season real quick, I know plenty of very highly knowledgeable college basketball people that fell for that tournament win and thought they were going to be really good, and I just didn't think. I said, I think it was an anomaly kind of thing. So I have Washington State in the 12 spot. How surprised were you that Ernie Kent is back this year with the team?
It's a good question. I mean, you would think, you would think that they would probably get rid of him based on the way things kind of fell apart last year. But again, I don't think there's just a huge expectation for basketball right now over in the eastern side of the state. And, I think just with some of these JUCO guys, he had already got in CJLB as a recruit, and a couple of these other guys he had in the pipe, they just didn't want to hit the reset button yet. So now they're looking at a team just full of shooters, and that could be dangerous. I mean, they kind of remind me of more of a mid-major dangerous team that if they get hot, they could just, especially in this conference where there's not exactly a dominant team, they could knock anybody off if they're shooting lights out. I mean, it's almost like not quite a South Dakota State, but maybe a Belmont type, and maybe without some of the skill, but yeah, so we'll see. They do have some upset potential, but I can't see them having a winning season by any means.
Yeah, me neither. Well, that's going to do it for our team previews tonight. We're just going to wrap up real quick with some fun picks. First up, we're going to have our player of the year picks. I think this conference is one of the conferences that doesn't have a clear-cut front runner for the award. I'm going to go with Chris Wilkes. I think he got kind of undervalued last year. I thought he was one of the better freshmen in the country. Averaged close to 14 points a game, 5 rebounds. He's a guy I really like, and I think McKinley Wright would be the other guy that I would pick if Colorado finishes in that top half of the league. What are you thinking for player of the year, Rocco?
Yeah, it's a tough one because you look at all the All-American teams, even a lot of people's top 3 or 4 teams, and you don't see a Pac-12 player.
Right. It's wide open.
Which might be good because that means probably more team ball than years past. I mean, the Pac-12's had the number 1 pick 2 years in a row and probably won't in next year's NBA draft, which is better for guys like us who like team basketball more. So based on just all the analysis, I think I was down to 2 guys. Peyton Pritchard ends up getting it because I have Oregon winning the league. And because of the reasons I mentioned earlier, he's going to be a guy they count on so heavily for so many responsibilities. So he's not going to lead the league in scoring or maybe even lead any statistical categories, but he's going to be the best player on potentially the top team. The other guy I was torn with was McKinley Wright. I think he, again, can carry Colorado on their back and take them far if he's able to. So I just don't think Colorado will ultimately finish high enough in the standings for him to get that recognition.
Newcomer of the year. I think the easy pick obviously is Bull. I'm going to go with Moses Brown. It's a kid I've been following all off season, watching a lot of tape on him. I just think he's going to be a big presence for UCLA on both ends of the floor. I'm really high on this kid, so I'm going to go with Moses Brown. Obviously, anybody could go with Bull. What are you thinking for newcomer?
I am going to go with Kevin Porter Jr.
Hey, that's a great pick too.
I can't get enough of the improvement he's made and how dominant he is on the court. And I think USC is a great system for him. He'll be able to play wide open basketball and take people off the dribble and put on a show night in and night out. So I think he's got the ability to take that award.
All right, and breakout player, I'm going to go kind of a deep sleeper here. I like Nick Rekosevich at USC. Like I said, I thought when Benny Boatwright went down with that injury last year, he played really well. Very good rebounder, very undervalued offensive guy. He can really score around the basket. And I think another kid that we talked about with Colorado is Tyler Bay. He averaged 6 last year. Kid can absolutely jump out of the gym. Very good rebounder. If he can, improve on the offensive end of the floor, I think he can be a very big time player for Colorado. So those are two guys that I really like. What do you think, Rocco?
Yeah, there's a lot of good options out there, but I am going to go with Emmanuel Akot from Arizona. I just think he is going to have to do it all for these guys all year long. He's going to play a ton of minutes, and he'll be able to show off a lot of different skills. And if I don't know if team success matters too much for breakthrough players, so I'll go with Emmanuel.
Yep, that's a good pick. And that's going to wrap it up for tonight, guys. Pac-12 preview in the books. If you guys haven't caught any of the other previews, we have the Mountain West preview, the SEC preview, and the ACC preview available on YouTube on the College Hoop News channel. So definitely check them out if you have time. Rocco, I really appreciate you joining tonight, and I'm sure you'll be back on the podcast sometime soon.
I appreciate it. It's always a pleasure, Tony. Thank you for having me, and I'm very excited for the season. It's going to be fun.
No problem. And again, Rocco is available on Twitter at Rocco Miller and the number 8. Obviously, check out his website, bracketeer.org. He does a fantastic job with bracketology. So during the season, definitely, hound him with as many questions as possible on Twitter. And he'll obviously be joining me on my Periscope bracketology show once we get enough games in the book and we can start talking about some bracketology this season. So looking forward to that. Again, Pac-12 preview in the books. We'll be back on Sunday with a Big East preview. Lucas Harkins from Busting Brackens will join me. We will break down the Big East. Looking forward to that, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.